Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. This probably shouldn't be too long of a segment. It's actually a bit of a comparison, a surprise comparison. These are two watches that I've featured multiple times on the channel, and they do really well. They're just on kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. One from a micro brand, one from a legacy brand. Of course, one a reissue of their first dive watch. Another one, this is actually their first dive watch, but of course both paying respects to the past in terms of their design language. Now, one thing that I kind of realized through ownership is there are actually a lot of times when I want to reach for my Baltic and I end up kind of having to figure out which I'm going to wear versus the SLA, which I think is kind of unexpected because, of course, the Baltic, there are so many 62 MAS homages out there, and the Baltic is probably, of course, although it does homage that period in terms of skin divers, it definitely is leaning more heavily towards something like the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. So I thought it was really interesting that, through kind of ownership, I've realized that these watches are pretty alike. And for those of you who can't maybe afford the 62 MAS, I think actually the Baltic is an amazing option that can fill a very similar space without going out and getting a direct homage. So I thought, why not revisit with a quick little comparison segment where I can just show you guys some of the similarities, some of the differences, and really where I think Baltic adds a whole lot of value, especially if you're not, some big type of fanatic and you're not looking to spend multiples of thousands on a watch or anything like that, right? So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, so we know the Baltic well, right? The Aquascape or Aquascaphe, depending on really how correct you want to pronounce it. It's a beautiful watch. It has a beautifully thin mid case. I love the proportions, but that's actually where a lot of the similarities start, right? You get that beautifully thin mid case, you get that pronounced bezel, right? The coin edge bezel, you get the great box dome sapphire. So there's a lot there that is very similar, which is cool. And I mean, Baltic did an amazing job on the fit and finish of this piece, guys. Look at this. I mean, that is beautifully done. I mean, don't get me wrong, guys. I'm not trying to compare and say that it's, exactly to the same level. It's not. I mean, this SLA is one of the finest dive watches Seiko's ever produced. To include, I think comparing it to any of their Grand Seiko divers, this definitely holds its own, especially considering the lineage there. So beautiful piece. Again, the job here isn't to discredit the Seiko or completely overhype the Baltic, but I just thought it was interesting that they did have so much in common. You think about the dials, right? So relatively small dials that are made even smaller because they push the indices towards the center of the dial while they have those outer minute tracks. Also, you have that thinner bezel, right, on the bezel insert. So the proportions are very, very similar. And then even when you just think about the case, of course, here you're getting the boxed lug there, so it's going to be straight end versus here it's going to be the traditional kind of open lug, but both of these actually look really good on straps. So if you wanted to throw a NATO, if you wanted to throw a Tropic strap on there, those are going to look absolutely amazing on these beautiful skin divers. Of course, the Baltic is referencing a time a little bit earlier, predating I think the inspirations, of course, because the 62 MAS is actually from 1965, whereas the Baltic is paying homage to the kind of mid to late 50s in terms of it being just a little bit flatter. Of course, no applied indices or anything like that. So this is a little bit more turn of the century. So ultimately, it's going to be a little bit more plain, right? Versus here, there's going to be a lot more pizzazz, right? Like this definitely can give you some luxury looks when you look at this piece. This doesn't look like just a basic tool watch. There's definitely certain elements, certain ways that the light hit it, capture it, the play. Look at that high polished rehaut in there, just beautifully, just liquidy gorgeous underneath that double curve box domed sapphire. But you also do get a box dome sapphire over here too, and a great amount of distortion. And again, that distortion right around the edges just gives you that play of water. Now, no, you don't get that deep, high polished rehaut that you get with the Seiko. You don't get the applied indices and all that, but you get something in a way that kind of distills the look even more, right? It's a little bit more simple, a little bit more monochromatic. It's really just black and white versus here. Of course, with the Seiko, you're going to have a certain tint when it comes to that extra bright, Lume bright. But you do have the larger crowns, nicely signed. Of course, Seiko with the full signature there, where Baltic has a really beautifully cut B. I mean, check that out. That is actually really, look at the way the light captures that. That is just immaculate, the level of detail there. And again, the tactile engagement of when you were grabbing onto this coin edge or the knurling that's on the crown, it's just beautiful engagement. 120 click bezel, guys. And I know this is a little unorthodox. If you want to go to the full review, feel free. I'll leave a link at the end of the video. You can just click right onto the graphic. But this thing is just, as in terms of functionality, it does it all. It really does. Now, it doesn't have the fully indexed you know, minute sections, right, for the full 60-minute timer. So, you know, you couldn't really say that this is going to meet ISO requirements, right? But this thing is gorgeous. And again, it's from a time earlier, so it's not going to say diver, you know, divers 200 meters. It just has a 200-meter rating, but it does it beautifully. And you do have, again, that thin mid case and less of a bubble back because you actually have a thinner movement. In this case, you get a bit more of a bubble back on there because there is a larger, you know, more robust movement, of course, being the 8L35 movement derived from the Grand Seiko 9S. So there's a lot of prestige there and, you know, technical prowess. But hey, the Miyota that's in here is no slouch. Also no date, but also no ghost position, which is really, really cool. So 9039 Miyota, it does the job. So this is just something that, I don't know, like, it just really overperforms for me. And I just thought that was really interesting. Like, and I always find it interesting when I'm watching YouTube videos, because of course I do watch YouTube videos, and somebody's like, hey, I own a Rolex sub, but I find myself reaching for my glycine, or, you know, just all those types of stories. Somebody owns the more prestigious, the more expensive watch, and they still find themselves deriving a lot of enjoyment, right? For a fraction of the cost, you're getting a large percentage of the same enjoyment. Now, of course, there's, as a huge Seiko lover, I love this watch, and it brings me a lot. But I mean, a lot of that, of course, is part of collecting, right? But if you were just looking for a great watch, and man, you have your eye on something like this, and it's kind of a fantasy, it's kind of a grail, I'll have to say, like, the Baltic delivers a lot. It does deliver a whole lot. So, I mean, let's actually get these on wrist now and kind of show you that they actually wear pretty similar. You think of a 38 millimeter, which that's the case. And then, of course, the bezel has a little bit of overhang. It's actually 39.5 at the bezel. Here, with the 62 MAS, or the, you know, SLA017, it does have a little bit of overhang as well. And this is about a 39, you know, 0.4 or something like that. But let's get them on the wrist. Check that out. So the standard looks gorgeous. Of course, if I get my wrist a little bit too close to the lens, you're going to get some perspective distortion. It's going to appear larger. So I just keep my wrist nice and low, guys, and you can see it just sits beautifully. I mean, perfect watch. Even though they just recently released the SJE variant, there was never a time when I said, I love this watch, I just wish it was a little smaller. So I'm totally fine with this. For me, this is my preferable version. As much as I would absolutely enjoy the SJE. This is definitely my choice. But check this out, guys. Again, fraction of the cost. I mean, right now, these are roughly going for about $700, you know, after you adjust for the currency difference. But look at that. I mean, it just wears absolutely fantastic. It's one of those things where, I mean, obviously people know about Baltic, and, you know, there was more hype around a lot of their newer releases, but these watches have just quietly been winning. I just feel like this is such a great watch. And of course there are other legacy brands out there. You know, there's of course Squall, Zodiac, you know, Doxa, right? Just all of the vintage revivals you can think of. So many of them now. Aquastar, they're all out there. Nevada Grinchen, so many great options. But I will say again, the cool thing here is this French brand Baltic, they don't have to worry about their history. They can just design purely from an aesthetic standpoint. And of course they're delivering in terms of a functional standpoint, but aesthetically they're able to just create something that just looks gorgeous and is absolutely well balanced. And I dig that. So let's actually just tighten up the frame here and take a look. And yeah, on my larger 7.5-inch wrist, it's you know, it's a nice tidy wear. It's not a big bulky, and believe me guys, I get into some pretty large watches, especially divers and chronographs. I enjoy them in larger sizes, but this is a really nice, tidy, everyday wear. It just oozes that beautiful vintage charm and aesthetic that we all kind of crave, right? So I just really enjoy that. Look at the way it wraps on the wrist. Just beautiful. And again, for comparison's sake, guys, oh, hey, check this beauty out. I mean, come on. But hey, it also has some polished surfaces, so you're getting fingerprints and smudges you got to worry about, like I'm worrying about right now. That, of course, when I'm wearing it, I'm not thinking about. But hey, if I'm going to get a camera and, you know, take a picture, I do find myself wanting to, you know, wipe off the smudges and really highlight the construction of this bad boy. Very, very nice. And again, for a fraction of the cost, hey, there's something really special here. So with that said, let's actually just get to some Lume shots, a light transition, closing thoughts, and just wrap this up. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. All right, guys. I mean, Seiko, Lume, Luma Bright versus anything is gonna be tough. But I have to say, this Baltic, it does the job, and it also has more lume on its bezel, right? Instead of just getting that lume pip, which is quite bright on the Seiko, you do get that fully, you know, basically the entire index is lumed. But let's go ahead and throw a little black light on there, give it a little bit of a supercharge. Hey, it does the job, right? So again, this, you know, there's a huge difference in price. And again, I'm not saying that the Baltic is some type of 62 MAS killer or anything like that. But one thing I always do like to work in, of course, is a bit of a low light transition section, because you're always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. So maybe include a little bit of harsh lighting, which typically could expose any types of production defects. But all you're going to see here is some really finely executed pieces with maybe just a little bit of smudging from this warmer end of summer day that I'm recording this on. But these both look great, guys. Even when you get into kind of those partial lighting situations, still a nice amount of contrast. Although that Baltic dial is going to be the matte, grainy textured, it still does have a decent amount of light play. Check that out. Very black, then it can also be quite gray. Very black, quite gray. So you do get some contrast, you get a bit of play. Of course, it's going to be a little bit more dynamic when you look at a sunburst type of dial, but that's kind of part of the look, right? It just has that kind of more luxury aesthetic when it comes to the 62 MAS. It's just glossier and just, you know, it just seems a bit more expensive, and it is quite a bit more expensive. But the Baltic, I tell you what, it's not a slouch. The way the light rolls over that beautiful beads of rice bracelet, the contours, although they are very simple, they are just well executed, and I dig that. So let's go ahead and get this going, guys. For me, guys, they both were really great. And again, this isn't really meant to be some type of comparison. Hey, you know, I know there's not a lot of cross shopping that's probably happening between these two models, but I did want to shine a light on Baltic as just, you know, it's one of those brands where they just do so much right. And, you know, as much as I can wear my Seiko with a lot of pride when I, you know, even if I'm going to a big watch meet, right? Same thing with Baltic, because they're kind of a darling micro brand that collectors really enjoy. So you can really be excited about wearing a Baltic as well, especially considering how production has been quite limited in the past years. But I will say these days you find more and more that you can just add them to cart, which I think is really awesome. So, you know, before these all sell out and disappear again, I thought, why not share this video if there's anybody that might have really been excited about Baltic maybe when it first came out and maybe just kind of forgot to check back with stock or anything like that, just because, yeah, this little diver, it just delivers, and I think that's really cool. I can see why this niche French brand has become so popular. It's they do so much right. And, you know, of course, on the grand scheme of things, yeah, I said this was going to be a short episode. Now it's full length. But, you know, with, of course, you think of things like the Rolex Submariner, right? Or the Blancpain 50 Fathoms, or, you know, the Zodiac Seawolf and those kind of iconic divers, Omega Seamaster, right? They're there. They're the big players, the heavy hitters and all that. There's been many homages, especially of the 50 Fathoms, but even more so, of course, of the Rolex Sub. And, you know, the 62 MAS these past couple of years has definitely seen a bump where there's just a million 62 MAS, you know, homages that are out there, and affordable options that really try to recapture a similar look, a similar vibe, even from Seiko themselves with the SPB 143 or SBDC 101, depending on, you know, which market you got it in, which I love. But that is definitely a decidedly modern timepiece, right? It's paying homage to the design, but not necessarily to the era. And this definitely pays more homage to the era, maybe less to the design, because I don't know if the amazing designer behind Baltic even had the 62 MAS on their radar. But I will say again, it captures a lot of those little nuances that I really enjoy. And yeah, there's a lot of watch fans out there that just want something timeless. They want something classic, and they don't want to spend a lot of money. So I will say, maybe before you check out some of those more factory-oriented direct homages, maybe the Baltic for a little bit more money. Again, you can get something that feels a little bit more original, but still captures a lot of those amazing feature sets. So with that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please hit like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.